Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bloodstained Journals, where I'm kind of journaling through videography, whatever you want to call it. This channel is kind of entertainment slash journals for myself and my little boy and the cousins. Get them involved with the outdoors, but also I like the aspect of it because I can record videos. And like, for an example, today's October 31st. I'm gonna journal along, take notes, and I'll upload it to the channel. That way my notes never get lost. With that being said, you know, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. Woke up at 4 this morning, October 31st, 2023. And I'm heading to a spot where it's public land in Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and I have history with several bucks. I have a few trail cam pictures back in 2021 of a buck we call Crabby, and also Broken Beam. And I could show you pictures somewhere right here. So I found the I found the shed of Crabby in, I think it was 2020. And that shed, I mean, it had all kinds of mass. And the reason we call him Crabby is because at the very end of his beams, it's almost, I guess the word's palminated, I don't know, but it comes out like a freaking moose. And I bet you the end of his horns are this thick with two little crab claws at the end. I don't even know if this buck is alive. I'm not running trail cameras yet for him, but sometimes that's the best way to hunt these mountain bucks, because usually if you get a picture of them right away, sometimes it means it's too late because they already have come through there, unless you're in an early season spot and you found where they're feeding around. But there's one deer I'm tracking, and I've been on a 4-year hunt for him. Different location, public land, but I went through Spartan Forge and outlined the perimeter of everywhere I've gotten a picture of this buck, and it was 15 square miles in the mountains. That is huge. Anybody that says that they're hunting specific buck beds in the mountain, to me, when I hear it, I just kind of chuckle a little bit, because there's no purpose in hunting one single buck bed in the mountains unless you just gotten lucky and found a gold nugget there in the midst of a freaking haystack, you know. I'm not saying it can't be done, but typically here in the mountains, we hunt good terrain features with food close by. That's something else I don't really get too involved with, is hunting specific feed trees in the mountains, because if you start looking, there's oaks, you know, on about every main ridge. It's just whether or not they're producing, but there's so many of them. Hunting one specific tree can sometimes take you out of the game, because you're not hunting in a pinch point or a terrain feature of where a more mature deer might run through. But anyways, got off tangent there a little bit, driving, just talking away. But going back, this area that I'm going to, I do have history with bucks, and I have trail cam pictures of in 2021 of these deer in October 31st, but it was the nighttime. And again, I'm not sweating it. Just because those cameras are up there and capturing, you know, those dates at night, doesn't mean they're not side hilling in the morning in daylight. So my purpose of trail cameras is to just more or less collect inventory, see what's out there, but I'm not betting on them too much, because I've only killed one deer out of my whole life that I've actually gotten a picture on a trail camera. if that puts it in perspective of how tough it is here in the mountains. I've gotten, pictures of the same buck several times in the mountains, but as far as actually killing one, I've only killed one, and it's actually my biggest one to date, is 11 pointer. But he was actually on private land that I asked permission for on I think it's 29 acres. I have to go back and reference that on Spartan Forge, but I'm pretty sure it's 29 acres. It's just the perfect 29 acres. My goal today is to hunt some historic sign that I know about, some scrapes. I haven't even been to this area yet this year, other than back in February to scout these scrapes. To find out that we had bucks all in November actually hitting this scrape in daylight, and one of them was crabby last year, November the 6th, in daylight, at like 8:35 or something like that in the morning. So, based off of the history, that deer's area is somewhat in there, but to actually kill him is going to be like a needle in the haystack, I will shoot, pretty much any mature buck. I'm even happy with a 3-year-old here in public land in the mountains, as long as it's a good rack buck and it's over 115 inches or around that number. He's going to have an arrow slung at him. Last year, in late December, I encountered one buck, and I'm not for sure which buck it was. Looking back, I kind of think it was crab. It was crabby, because when he turned his head sideways, when he turned his head sideways, I seen the mass and then those 2 crab claws. But that's kind of me reflecting back on what I seen right then and there. I didn't know what it was, because what had happened was I was hunting with my longbow on the very top of a ridge in I think it was middle December, and I just so happened to walk across a scrape. I looked down, seen the scrape, so I kept on walking towards a point, kind of still hunting / scouting, trying to find some food. Walked down the point, and then I came back where I came from, because I ended up seeing a red oak that had some scatter around it. And as soon as I got back to that scrape, I just heard the awfulest ruckus coming up from the holler beneath me. And what it ended up being was a big buck chasing me. I guess he thought I was competition. Big buck came right at me at 13 yards, slightly hard quartered to, and put himself between a tree. And I was on the ground with my longbow at 13 yards. I mean, that buck was just massive. To be on the ground that close in front of him and not be able to have a shot opportunity was painful. It was very painful. But just to see an animal like that was awesome. More of that story was, once he came to check me out, he was actually with 2 does. 2 does were following him, which kind of brings me to another, I don't know if it's factual or what, but I think the reason that we don't see a lot of mature bucks really early in November is because I actually think that the does find them. They the bucks put themselves in a situation to where they know where the doe groups are, but when those does are ready, I think those does actually go after the buck, will come to him. There's not much of a chase opportunity there for him. And that's just something I have kind of collected over the past several years. I've never seen a mature buck, except, well, I can't say never in deer hunting in the mountains. I have seen one mature buck cruising for does, like a normal 2 or 3 year old would cruise. Other than that, I I have not seen any mature bucks really cruising for does in earlier November. Now, once they get the first, breeding cycle done, then obviously they get back up on their feet and start cruising again. But that's just kind of how I think, I could be totally wrong, but just based off of the areas I hunt and what I've seen, it might just have been the way, luck has happened. But over the years, I have not seen but one mature buck cruise for does in early. Well, actually, no, you know what? I lied. I've never seen one, because the one I seen wasn't cruising. He was actually with 2 does. And this was October the 27th, 2 years ago. I ended up missing this buck with my recurve. He was at like 28 yards or so away, and I just got excited, got buck fever, and I remember pulling back my bow, getting to where I thought was on, and I was completely off target, and I was looking at the deer the whole time, not really referencing anything in my sight picture, and there's that. Other than that, he was a mature buck. He was over 4 years old. I have pictures of him as well. I can probably put right here. Actually, I don't have pictures, but the neighbors have pictures. Once I start asking the neighbors questions, and they're hunters too, they sent me pictures and was asking me if it was this buck. But he's real distinguished. He had just a pitchfork on one side, and then the rest was just non-typical stuff. I mean, he was a tank of a buck. But to go back to this journal, we have a cold front coming in. It's actually sprinkling right now. It's supposed to stop raining. It was 70 some degrees yesterday. Now it's 43. It's supposed to drop down to 37 degrees. I didn't look to see when the moon's overhead. I don't really care if the moon's overhead, although it does make the deer more active. But whenever I can take a day of vacation, sometimes I just have to take it, and whatever happens with the weather or the moon happens. I just got to take the most of each opportunity I get and roll with it. But the goal for today is to find those active scrapes near bedding and food, and just put the time in right there, because I feel like a buck right now is going to be working scrapes, getting ready for that main breeding cycle in mid-November. I know, I pretty much know what area I'm going to, but to know what tree I'm going to, I don't know yet. I kind of thought about scouting in there at daylight. That way I can see better. Kind of still hunt my way into the area. That way I can find a tree that's overlooking 2 historic scrapes, actually. And both of these scrapes were being worked the past couple years. And that's about really all I have to go on right now. Like I said, I don't have recent trail camera photos. I don't even have a trail camera out on this particular area. But I ain't too worried about it. Because if I see the signs opened up, I do have one in my backpack I can throw on the sign just to see what's using it. But again, it all goes back to what I said earlier. Sometimes them trail cameras can hurt you more than they help you, because they only pick up what's right there in front of them. But how many times does bucks go below it or above it or around it and it's not picking up? So typically, rule of thumb is if you're getting a buck on picture more than once, he's in that area. I don't care if you only get them once in November or once in, October, he's probably in that area. But the hard thing about hunting deer is there are several cruisers that just, you know, cruise around. You're only going to see one time. But typically, if you're in an area and you see a cruiser, you need to probably go ahead and hunt that spot multiple times, because if one cruises there, chances are there's going to be another one. And that's something, you know, here in the mountains, whenever you're listening to, you know, podcasts or watching YouTube channels, there's not many YouTube channels or shows or podcasts that talk about hunting, you know, these mountains here in Southwest Virginia with super low deer density. And I think the reason why is because there's not much action. I'm friends with a couple of guys that are hardcore that, I mean, they hunt several times. And, you know, there's times they have to hunt 7 days in a row before they see a mature buck. And a lot of times whenever you see those mature bucks, you're not going to see all kinds of deer at one setting. I mean, truthfully, anytime I can go in the woods here on public land and see, you know, a deer or two, usually it's a pretty good day, because I can't tell you how many times I go and don't see anything. And that's just because if you're hunting deer, it's a different story. But if you're hunting a mature buck, I mean, you just prepare to not see nothing, because they kind of travel completely different than the rest of them deer do. But one thing's for sure, this time of year, I don't think you can go wrong with hunting them doe groups, just because you never know when one's going to come in hot and lure in a big buck or a shooter buck right there underneath you. But we're probably getting ready to wrap it up for this journal on this morning. I can, you know, journal more as the day goes. One more story, then I'll get off here. And it's talking about deer travel, buck travel. 2021 in November, I was hunting a spot on public. I had scouted it in rifle season on doe day. And man, I hate when there's a stoplight and traffic's backed up across railroad tracks. Sketchy. Anyways, was hunting it on doe day, or scouting it on doe day. And that's actually when I found the shed of Crabby. I think it was either 2020 or 2021. And then when I found the shed, I ended up finding, it was his old shed. I ended up finding about 8 or 9 big rubs right in the saddle, you know, of a ridge in a bottom. So like the ridge was up here, and there's another ridge up here, and they all went down here to the bottom, and there was just the most gorgeous sign. And you know, it's like, I'm gonna hunt right there. Well, I hunted right there a couple of days later, and I was setting up high enough to where I could see that saddle, but then also see a real steep, I'm gonna call it a ditch on the other side, to where my thermals could kind of drop in there and not be blowing all throughout that saddle where I thought the buck was coming. So I was kind of set up more on the east side of the mountain, and then that east face is where that ditch was. So my thermals were dropping down in that ditch. I had a west wind, and at around 4:45 that evening, I hear something coming. He did not come through that saddle. He went completely underneath that saddle in that super steep ditch. And what was happening is he was using that wind and the thermals right there where all that sign was. There were scrapes there too. He never once had to go up there and visually check it. He could run that ditch and have that wind and thermals drop down, and all that scent that was there in the saddle and scrapes would drop down right to him, and he could check him on the run without ever having to be exposed. I've set that spot there a year later, probably close to 10 times, and only seen one buck. If that puts in perspective, you know, how many deer I see here on public land. Only seen one buck cruising that. Granted, I do have a picture of a really big 8-pointer on December the 31st that was using that again. But as far as me actually sitting there and hunting that hard, out of those 10 days, I only seen one buck, and it was a little 4-point that came across underneath and just kind of worked he fed his way up in that deep holler towards the back where that ditch forms. But that's just kind of proves the point I was trying to say of, you know, deer travel, buck travel, and how mature buck travel and how they used terrain features to their advantage. You can get mentally worn out and physically worn out hunting these deer, but you know, there's some days I just sit back and think to myself, why in the world do I put myself through so much grief and heartbreak on these animals? But it's really, you know, I enjoy the chase of it, the journey along. I embrace the freaking suck. And I think it all boils down to I like to compete. The competition that these deer provide me, you know, I'm always competing against them because I'm trying to get one up on them to where I meet them in their territory without them knowing I'm there, and before they know I'm there. It's just a game. Alright, that's the last story I have. I talked rather long on this one. Forgive me. It's now around 5:30. So I'm gonna jump off here and continue my hour and 20-minute drive to this spot. Then I've got about an hour hike in. And that'll put me right at daylight, hopefully. Because again, I want to be able to see exactly which tree I'm going to set up. And we're just kind of going to play it by ear. We'll see y'all in a minute. Actually, I lied. We'll see y'all later. It's just starting to get daylight. I've been hiking for about an hour, but I want to show you what I have to hike through to get to my spot without buggering anything. My flashlight is on right now, but as you can see, I've got a little trail cut out of this rhododendron, and I'm gonna end up there. See how it goes. Alright. I'm set up here in the saddle. And luckily, I'm sitting over a fresh scrape on the historic sign of Boomtown. It's sprinkling on and off, so I would think that this is prime for this scrape. make a buck when I come freshen it up. There's red oak caps, red oak trees that have, I assume, red oaks. I did not spend much time nosing around looking for the food. I seen a couple caps and knew that's probably good enough, especially given that there's sun right here. I'll flip the camera around and show you guys what I'm talking about. Alright, my entrance trail is way down the holler. This place wraps around into a saddle with a big knob on top. I expect deer to come down this ridge or around up above, and then I literally came from this way and then went straight here to the base of my tree. So if I get a shot on one, I'll have to shoot before he crosses my track through here, because I actually had to get ready at the base of my tree because I didn't know exactly where I was hunting yet. So there's more ground scent than I'd want. But if one walks through here, I'll be fine. There's a point coming off a little crow's foot in the back of a deep holler. You can kind of see it through there. And then a bench. And realistically, that's where I need to be, somewhere down through there on that bench. But I'm not, because my wind is actually coming this way. So what I'm expecting for today is the padding is all down through there. I'm expecting one to actually come up, kind of downwind of the scrape, and then maybe circle back in. You can't see it good because there's still trees in the way, but there's a scrape right here that has just been worked. But I mean, it's just gorgeous. That bench right here is actually an east face. I don't know if you can see it all that well. There's a few big red oaks. I didn't have time to go check them. I didn't want to check them because I didn't want to go put a lot of scent down. But if this evening, depending on how this morning goes, I might get down and actually hunt that bench, because I think there's actually a scrape. Well, no, it's not. There's a scrape somewhere down there, a historic scrape. But I've got pictures of mature bucks walking the spine of this ridge in daylight. Typically they don't do that, but the reason I think that they are in this location is because of the transitions. It's kind of more open over through there, but I mean, it's thick laurel right here. And then there's some red oaks over here, so predominantly the wind comes down and kind of does like this. For whatever reason today, though, it's blowing this way. Kind of opposite of what the forecast said. I'm gonna shut up and get off here. And that is a wrap for today. Set my saddle for around 10 hours without seeing a single deer. It's pretty typical in the mountains. It's nothing too surprising. Actually, I take that back. I did see a deer, and it was on my way out. I left a little bit early, and I was walking down the spine of the ridge, walking towards that bedding knob that I pointed out to you guys. It has that east face bench on it, and I ended up seeing a bear. It was about 150 pounds. I made a stalk on it, got within about 65 yards, and my wind was blowing down the ridge, and that bear was just across from me, and those does were downwind from me. They were wrapped around. They were still bedded there on the east face, so it was kind of strange. There's a bear and does pretty much bedded together there, which tells me, you know, there's food, and that is a really good sign, because it's been tough finding food for me this year. But I'm going to go ahead and cut this journal off. It was a slow one, but I will try to get some pictures for you guys of this buck that has showed up last year and the previous year, maybe the shed as well that I found all the way back in, I think it was a 2018 or 2019 shed. It's an old shed, all chewed up. And I don't care to post some pictures on here. That way you guys can see what I'm after. Y'all have a good day. Thanks for watching. Bye.